Welcome to the Pain-Free Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Dana Jones. I am a certified personal trainer, and I'm here to help you achieve your fitness goals without pain. In each episode, I'll share tips and strategies that will help you stay safe and pain-free while you're working out. I'll also interview experts in the field of fitness and pain management. So if you're ready to learn how to stay active and pain-free, then subscribe to the Pain-Free Athlete Podcast today. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Pain-Free Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Dana Jones, and today I am joined by a special guest, and this is Stephen Hicks. Hi, Stephen.
Hey, Dana, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. So why don't you share a little bit about yourself and how you got all into this and, your origin story?
Yeah, so I've got a couple different origin stories. Kind of, as we collect some grays in our hair, I've got this white patch here. We get new stories, right? So I guess the short version is I've been a personal trainer since 2010. I originally got into this. I went to college to be a cross country athlete, so I did cross country and track on a D1 level. And I got injured my freshman year. My calf never really recovered from it. So I ended up, this was back in the 2008 kind of budget crisis. So I ended up getting cut due to the injury. And I started lifting weights, just kind of going back. Now that I didn't need to be a professional skinny guy, I started lifting weights, and I got back to my home during winter break. And my dad had saw that I had become a different person. And he pointed to me during dinner one night and he was like, that, can you do that for me? So I had a lot of fun. Kind of, I isolated myself in the room for the entire winter break, and I wrote out like this 12-month calendar of workouts to do, and I set up my bedroom.
Wow.
To be like a circuit room for him. And we had different exercises, different stations. I had a blast. So when I went back to college, I changed my major to exercise science and decided I wanted to be a personal trainer. And unfortunately, personal training industry, there's not really a lot of barrier to entry. You don't need a degree. And so I was still 20, 21 at this time, trying to justify going back to college because I was young and having a bunch of fun. And I discovered to be a collegiate strength coach, you did need a degree. You needed the CSCS certification, and to sit for that, you had to have a relevant degree. So I ended up going back, changing my major to exercise science so that I could just stay in school for a little bit longer. And I did. I used my connections in the athletic department to become an assistant strength coach. But, as tuition went up, still I'm 22 at the time, wanted some extra beer money on the weekends, started doing personal training at the rec center. And that's when I saw, holy smokes. I was working in athletics. I grew up in athletics, but the transformations I saw in personal training, people became more electric. People became more alive. People were more bubbly. They had more energy. They had more self-confidence. And I started to have this aha moment that I wanted to get away from athletics and get into general wellness because you can make meaningful impacts in people's lives. And so that was my first step away from athletics. And then 2019, I was playing with some friends down in Vegas, and I actually shattered my leg. I had a tibial plateau fracture. Usually when people break their bone, you think about like that sideways snap and the bone breaks in two parts. My shin, my tibia, actually split open from the top down. So instead of snapping, it cracked open. And so I now have a steel rod in my left leg, 5 pins, 3 screws, putting that all back together. I had 4 months of bed rest. And I can't do a lot of the old stuff that I used to do. I can't push my body to the limits anymore. And during that time, I had a lot of time to reflect. 4 months of bed rest, you just kind of stare at a wall wondering, what is life? And for me, I discovered that when I crouched into my brother's house and my nephew came running down the hall, screaming, excited, Uncle's here. And my brother had to catch him and tell him, no, you can't play with Uncle. Uncle's hurt. And to tell a 4-year-old that you can't play, that's heartbreaking. And so I realized that fitness for me was not about pushing my body to the limits. It was about having a healthy body so that I could participate in life the way I wanted to with the people that I wanted to. And so I had a second larger step away from athletics and into the wellness space with that incident and with that moment and with that realization. So there's my origin story in 2 parts.
That's crazy. That injury is pretty significant.
Yeah. It's was not a small happenstance.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
So you get into, so now here we are, and this is how many years ago was when you started the wellness?
Yeah, so I started personal training back in 2000, but the accident was 2019. So I'm coming up in a few months on my 6-year anniversary, and I'm planning on doing a 6-mile race to celebrate. I'm doing a 10K, which 6 years ago probably wouldn't have been the smartest thing, but we'll talk a little bit more later on. I've done a lot of rehab. I've done a lot of strengthening. I've done a lot of support of that, and I feel fine. I do 20-mile hikes without pain. I go for jogs. I do only jog on dirt right now, but I can go for a run. I'm alive. A lot of times an injury this big, this of this magnitude, people sit on the sidelines for the rest of their life. And for me, wellness was about not sitting on the sideline any longer.
Well, that was going to be my next question is what do you believe the overall importance in the overall, and I'm trying to say it, achieving overall wellness. That's what I'm looking for. So how important is that for you? Because you're fairly young. I know for, somebody my age, there
Thanks.
is
Just
that.
don't look at the hairline.
It is what it is, right? We can't worry about it. But that's the thing. It's just that, for as I'm finding that women that are older, that are over 50, are really starting to look at, like, what did I do? I don't know. The other day I was like swinging through reels, and all of a sudden I saw like some ladies, like, when you're 18, you're like, how many shots of tequila can I, or 21, sorry, how many shots of tequila can I do?
We'll
Right. And
pretend
then,
it's 21.
yeah,
It's
there you go.
okay.
And then now it's like we're shooting vitamin supplements because we're like, crap, we did it, we did it wrong. Now it's like I got to make sure that I don't look horribly old, and just basic things. I can go to bathroom and get up
Yeah.
off the
So
bowl, or my grandchildren, or play on the floor, or those things.
Yeah, so it's kind of a complicated answer. It's kind of there's layers to this. For me, it might sound surprising, but I don't really find a lot of importance in health and fitness anymore. For me, health and fitness and wellness, they support everything else in life that is important. So, like when we were younger, when we were in our 20s, after taking those shots of tequila, you cared about what your body looked like. You cared about like all these like weird athletic performance things. Like the ego and the standards were different. Like it was fitness for fitness sake was a big driver. And now I maintain fitness because one, I've seen what people look like when they don't age healthily, when they're not taking care of themselves, and I don't want to sit on the sideline. For me, wellness is just kind of that necessary evil that we do to do all the things we want to do. It is the gateway that leads us to everything else that is important.
There you go. It's a gateway drug.
Yeah, the good kind.
I love that. So in this idea, you have a mind body connection that all of a sudden occurs. And can you explain your, I guess, interpretation of the mind body connection?
Yeah, so obviously people have talked about this for eons, right? All the way like the ancient Greeks had a big focus on fitness as well as knowledge, right? Plato was a champion wrestler. Aristotle had a gymnasium in his Lyceum. But anyway, it's not a new idea, but we do have a lot more research and a lot more evidence. And what I find really interesting is the way that the mind can act on the body, right? It's very obvious we know about placebo effects, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. When we do a lot of that mindset coaching, that mindset training, you can actually alter someone's biochemistry based on their thought patterns, right? And I can prove this right now. Dana, have you ever had a lemon?
Yes.
Do you know what a lemon is? It's really sour fruit. It's yellow, it's bright, it's juicy. And a raw lemon, like if I were to cut a lemon and then sneak up behind you and catch you off guard and then just squeeze the lemon juice into your mouth, like it's a sour experience, right? And just thinking about this, like my mouth's watering. Is your mouth watering thinking about like that sour taste?
No,
Oh,
because
okay.
I'm from New Jersey, and I was like, if you squeeze a lemon in my face, I'd probably punch you first.
Okay. So a different
So if
response,
I
right?
was if I was eating the lemon, yes, right, maybe
Okay,
sorry,
so still
self defense.
there's a response there regardless, right? Because you
Yes,
punch me in the face, there's probably a little bit more tension in the shoulders, the chest,
for sure.
and those muscles. Like you might have clenched your fist a little bit. Like, don't you
Yeah.
sneak up on me, Stephen. Like our thoughts dictate our behaviors, and it can radically alter the way that our body functions. And so we do have that. And then on the opposite approach, we have a lot of research and a lot of evidence of how the body impacts the mind and the thoughts, right? When we exercise, our body releases chemicals like ANP, atrioneurotrophic peptide, and BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It also releases more oxytocin, more serotonin, what Stanford researcher Kelly McGonigal refers to as the hope molecules. Exercise releases those. So there's this bi-directional relationship of how the mind impacts the body and the body impacts the mind. And oftentimes people talk about this in one direction, right? They'll talk about you want to exercise for mental health, or they'll talk about a lot of the mind, the manifestation, the law of attraction crowd. They'll talk about how the mind affects the physical body. But I think both sides are true. And I think when we can focus on both, we can support each other well with that mind-body connection.
Yeah, it's definitely a two-way street for sure. And because we do have the capability of really producing those feel-good hormones, and then it encourages us to keep moving forward. So when you and I chatted before, one of the comments that you made was that what has been made can be remade. And I would love for you to go into detail and explain that to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one of my central core philosophies. And it was hugely instrumental. We talked about my injury, right? Where my leg was split open, and how now I can do 20-mile hikes pain-free, how I can do a 6-mile run pain-free. I firmly believe that what's been made can be remade. And I thankfully came across this really early when I was young, kind of in the high school days. I remember going to Barnes & Noble, and I've always been a nerd. So I went into the philosophy section, and it was my first time being exposed to, it was Heraclitus that said, no man can step in the same river twice. And when he had said this, what he was talking about is that river flows. Time continues to move on. The drops of water that you're walking next to today are going to flow down river. And then when you walk back into that river, it's going to be fundamentally made up of different parts. The rocks will shift. You can't step in the same river twice. But this book that I was reading took it from the other side too. Because of cellular regeneration, our body is constantly shedding cells and replacing those cells. So not only does the river change, but the man changes as well. Right? And through this process, this continual process, it seems like every cell in your body over whatever time period, different parts of the body change at different rates. But over time, everything will be renewed. Everything will be changed. And this, I think, is really, really exciting and massively hopeful that everything will change. And if you can support your body during those regeneration cycles, for enough of those cycles of replacing the old and putting in new, if you're supporting yourself with the right signals, we get that through activity and through mindset. If you're supporting yourself with the right building blocks that we get through nutrition, and if you're giving yourself a healthful environment, an environment that promotes health through sleep and stress management, well, every time you go through that cycle of regeneration and recreation, you can remake your body into whatever you want it to be ultimately, because we're constantly changing out the Lego bits. You just upgrade and get better Lego bits.
That makes sense. I had a friend who she did colon hydrotherapy and would talk about that, especially when dealing with the colon and removing all bad bacteria and trying to replace it. And one of the things I believe it takes 9 days for the stomach lining to like reline itself. And that's how we heal. I mean, that's how the body is that we have the ability, right? You cut your finger. How many days does it take it for all those cells to fill in, get rid of, dead tissue and move it along so that all of a sudden it's, the cut is no longer there when you're looking at 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
So if you can believe that your cut can be healed, then there's other parts of your body that could be healed as well.
Yeah. And we can combine that, what we were talking about earlier with the mind-body connection. we have seen it does appear that people can be a little bit more self-directive with their healing and with their recreation. I've had clients in the past that have had astounding, like beyond reasonable results when they got in a lot more emotional buy-in.
Yes.
We usually try to do in my coaching program, I try to go through self-image exercises the self-image exercises where we can really talk about, who we're creating, since what can be made can be remade, talking about like the future you, who you really are, talking about the tip I always give people is when you're relaxed, just consider when I'm thriving, I blank. Right? That can be a physical description, that can be a behavioral description, but it sets this image in our mind that our mind seems to, in the background, constantly monitor and make adjustments to make come true. Similar to like the thermostat in your house, right? You set the destination, you set the image of the thermostat to like 67 degrees, and then your heater will constantly monitor the environment in the background. When it gets to 65, it turns on the heat. When it gets to 68, 69, it'll turn off the heat. It constantly monitors in the background and makes adjustments. And I think that our minds do kind of act as a psycho-cybernetic device to control and monitor the body in the background. And then look, when you set up, hey, I'm going to do the things to lose fat. I'm going to do more fat metabolism. The body has that image and will change your biochemistry in the background to facilitate that and make that more expedient, make that more dramatic than just the actions by themselves without the mental directive.
Do you think that clients are still on that line of like, that sounds a little too woo-woo for me?
So it depends on like how much we get to describe and explain that ahead of time. If you go out the gates and be like, hey, we're going to think ourselves skinny, that sounds like bullcrap, right? Because people know that you're going to need some action to back that up as well. However, we see, especially with placebos. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of a hysteria pregnancy, where there's people that were so desperate to be pregnant that they had all of the physical symptoms of pregnancy, the growth in the abdomen, the nausea, the morning sickness. They had everything except for a fertilized embryo, right?
Mhm.
There are a lot of things where we have psychosomatics. We just know the more we discuss that before we get into, hey, we need to have that self-image exercise, it usually gets more accepted on that approach.
There's foundational work
Yeah.
that's done.
Yeah.
Okay. So what are, I mean, as we're heading in this direction, like what are some common misconceptions that people have about this type of holistic fitness?
Yeah, so you brought it up a little bit. You mentioned kind of, because I do talk about holistic fitness, the word holistic itself has been kind of appropriated with the woo-woo crowd and some of the unsubstantiated, unsupported stuff. So whenever we talk about holistic fitness, I do get a lot of people that are like, oh, this is like a spiritual thing. And it's not. I'm a little bit more of the classical definition. Holistic originally just meant all the parts. So when I talk about holistic fitness, I want to talk about, like we talked about with my rehab with the knee, we want to talk about the right signals of health, which was the mindset and the activity. We want to talk about the right building blocks of health, which is nutrition. And we want to have the right environment for health, which is the sleep and the stress management and the community. That's the holistic. The spiritual stuff, I don't know. That's to each their own. I don't really get into the woo woo that much specifically, but I do want to make sure that we're getting all the elements of health. And then when it's individually relevant, if people do want to have that spiritual practice, more power to you.
Okay. So in dealing with that kind of stuff, like so we talked a little bit, or you skirted around nutrition, and what is your nutritional practice? I guess just to
Yeah,
throw it out
so
there.
my nutritional practice, with everything that I do, my big lens is to support and nurture the body so that it can be healthy. And for me, healthy, the way we define that is on the short term, it should give you more energy. In the long term, it should be able to allow you to live longer. And when those two conflict, we want to default to the long term, right? So, I mean, just to be ridiculous, cocaine will give you more energy, but it'll also make your heart explode and die younger. So short term, more energy, long term, less life, not healthy, right?
Right.
Long-term wins. Same thing with like brushing your teeth. No one's ever going to brush their teeth and be like, I'm ready to start the day. Yeah. Right. Brushing your teeth is not going to give you more energy, but we do know that oral health does increase your lifespan and your health span. So that's going to be a healthy action. Hopefully, ideally, we find things that do both, that give you more energy in the moment and extend your lifespan. But with that as a lens, support and nurture the body. I'm not going to really count calories. It's a tedious practice. No one feels energized by doing it. As far as like the recent trend and fad for carnivore, we don't have any examples of any meat exclusive cultures living beyond 70 years old. So I'm not going to promote that. But we do have a lot of examples of omnivores, people that eat animal and meat products with mostly plants and smart carbohydrates. They tend to have the longest lifespan. They feel better day to day. And they have energy. And that's kind of where we're going. So I always think about food. Your whole body, every cell in your body is made up of food. So we just want to have good quality food to replace those cells, to remake them. And then we want to have the right balance and right portions so that we feel good as we eat.
Yeah, there's a lot of that sluggishness after, especially if you do like a heavy carb or a crappy carb kind of meal where you feel that like and
Yeah,
you
and
want to take a nap.
that's not necessarily carbs itself or fat itself. It's usually the quantity, right? Or the imbalance. If it's just carbohydrates, you're probably going to crash. If it's super heavy on fats, you're probably going to get a little sluggish. But if it's balanced, and we usually talk about in my program 3 categories of food. You got proteins, carbohydrates, and plants. We talk about those 3 categories and then what an appropriate serving size is. So we balance it so you don't get those weird spikes and crashes and valleys. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know I deal a lot with triathletes and varying just people that are out there. And one of the things that we note is that a lot of the nutrition for distance running triathlons are gels and, chews and all those things that are just that quick carb shot. And for me, I know that it was a nightmare because my race would be, like, I feel great. I feel horrible. I feel great, as you're eating all this stuff. And it's exhausting. It takes a lot more out of your body than probably if I just probably cut up a sweet potato and, fried it out in the dehydrator and had those instead of going for the chews.
Yeah. I mean, back in my day when I was racing, like I mentioned, I was a D1 cross country and track athlete. This was back like gels were starting to be a thing, but they still weren't. We just ate a bunch of bananas.
Yeah, which is not great. I mean, that's pretty quick energy too.
Yeah.
But at
Yeah.
least they
No.
have a little substance as opposed to a gel.
Yeah, but that was usually like post afterwards, and then we tried to pair that like peanut butter and banana was
Mhm.
probably a staple back in the day for me. That was, I mean, I would dip the banana in the peanut butter, but yeah.
Yeah.
But that does add a little bit of protein and it adds some fat to balance the carbohydrates, so you don't just get that spike of the sugar and then the crash afterwards. It does kind of even that out. I do wonder about some of the gels and the chews and all this, the quick carb supplements. They're real quick hits. Back when they were coming out, they were usually just like a little boost in like mid race.
Mhm.
I never saw anyone try to build nutrition around it, but it was like a performance aid. I'm not in that world anymore. Or do you have people that are doing like a bunch of gels and chews like during the week outside of training and stuff?
Well, you should, right? I mean, if that's going to be what you're doing during race, yeah, you better practice
Yeah,
with it too,
practice.
because that would be a nightmare. Runners obviously have more issues around that kind of stuff because it's very easy to become, how shall we say this, gastronomically.
Yeah. My cross country coach said there's no such thing as a constipated runner.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, so you got to be careful. You don't want to do too much of that stuff. And it also depends on how quickly you race. If you're running a 4 or 5 minute mile, then you're done half an hour. So which is an appropriate amount of, if you have a good lunch, you shouldn't need anything for
Yeah.
those types of activities. But again, sometimes I'm dealing with triathletes that are out there for hours and hours and hours, and the mind messes with you. There's a lot of issues, but I am seeing there's a lot when you're doing rest stops. A lot of times they'll try to have like snack treats or trail mix or chips or soda. Not most rest stops are not healthy unless they just have water. Then you're like, yay, okay, you did it. But when you're looking at these longer races, it's usually a lot of crap, because that's what people want after a certain period of time, especially if you're out there. If you're talking a full Ironman, people are out there 16 hours, and that's a long time. And it's hard to sit down and have a meal. And a lot of times you don't feel good because you're just out there and you're kind of pushing your body to the limit between nervousness and whatever. So to have a sandwich or something like that is not on the agenda. So sometimes people do ride their whole experience through with gels, and it's never good.
That's interesting. Yeah, like I mentioned, I've been stepping away from athletics throughout my career and focusing on wellness. But man, back in my day, like, and of course, I was a distance runner, so we were 10Ks, half marathons, marathons. But the aid stations I remember for marathons were just like there was water, half a banana, or like a third of a banana, and like some orange slices.
Yeah, I
Things have
think they do that
things
for
have changed a
kids.
little bit. Yeah,
They do it for kids. Like when I go do Girls on the Run, yeah, they don't have crap. They have like
yeah.
good stuff out there. And even when you're done, they're like, hey, you can have a chocolate milk and that kind of stuff, a
Yeah,
granola
it
bar.
was yeah, it was like not even a full banana, just like a couple bites, a
Mhm.
bite or two, some orange slices, and then whatever you had on your body. Like we just used our fat stores, those that had some fat stores.
Yeah, you're a distance runner. You probably didn't have a whole lot of fat, especially in high school. Like, let's be real. So what's next for you? You talked about all the work that you're doing and where you're heading. What's next on your agenda? What's coming up?
Yeah. So I'm one of the big things that I'm doing right now. So I've got an online only program. And I'm working on the next 24 months of trying to create a hybrid facility. I really love the online stuff. There's so many advantages, but in person does get a little bit of a community aspect. And I do want to add that in by creating a facility where people can do that. That's my big dream. I'm working on my podcast, trying to keep that consistent. So if anyone wants to listen, get some more ideas around wellness and some different approaches, that's the Thriving Body podcast. That's available on Spotify, Stitcher. Stitcher no longer exists anymore. That's not on Stitcher. Spotify, Apple, Google, those type of podcast zones. And then yeah, just trying to always be better each day.
Okay. How do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I'm primarily on Facebook. You can find me Thriving Body Holistic Fitness, or you can find Stephen Hicks. There's probably at least a dozen of us. So you're gonna want to find the one with the prettiest, the most handsome looking gentleman. That'll be my profile picture.
He's got a
No,
good beard, folks. He
yeah,
does.
you can find me on Facebook. It's either Stephen Hicks is my personal or Thriving Body Holistic Fitness as my professional.
All right. Stephen, well, thank you so much for joining us. And
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, hey, Dana, before we
yes.
run off, though, we talked a lot about mindset and kind of that mind body connection. What I'd like to do for your listeners is just kind of offer, so with my coaching program, there's a holistic kind of education and training stuff. I'm going to take the mindset component out and distill that and make that available for your listeners if you want that.
Oh,
So
that's fantastic.
yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go ahead and create a page on my site where you can sign up and download that. But that's going to be thrivingbody.fit/Dana Jones.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. I don't know if I love it. We appreciate it. So I'm thanking you for everyone.
Dana at least appreciates it.
I
Someone
appreciate
else
it.
somewhere in the internet will probably.
That's awesome. All right, Stephen, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll chat soon.
Okay. Thank you.